Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's topic, vehicle rules. And here, this episode, like all episodes, sponsored by Roll20.net. Check the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. I got a little enthusiastic. And follow us on Twitter and Facebook, SWGM Podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, SWGM Podcast, and the iTunes Savage Worlds GM Podcast. So, as I was saying before I got a little bit carried away, tonight's episode is vehicle rules. Here to discuss it, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Yes, I'm back.
Dave, the rules maven Scott.
Citations.
And some call him Jib.
Yeah, right.
So, vroom, vroom, bitches. Let's talk vehicles.
So I don't get the acceleration versus top speed.
Quiet. You will get to that in a minute.
Oh, sorry.
So, Savage Worlds really has two sets of rules when it comes to vehicles and their place in the game. One being the abstracted chase rules, which can be used for foot chases, boating chases, vehicle chases. That's part of it. There's also there's an entire section dedicated to vehicular combat and movement on the table. These rules are more for the miniature war game aspect. If you're looking for tactical rules combat in Savage Worlds, this is kind of the way you want to go with that. So let's start off then by addressing Chris and probably everybody else's biggest question about, wait a minute, was ist das Acceleration und Top Speed?
The German. So, of course, you turn it over to me.
Well, you are the rule maven. I mean,
so the acceleration top speed is supposed to simulate this idea of inertia. You have the idea that as your vehicle's going faster and faster, you can only change speed by a set amount, but you're still carrying whatever speed you were going the previous round. And that acceleration sets how quickly you can get up to it. And top speed, obviously, is the maximum speed that the vehicle can achieve. The interesting aspect of this, most people don't pay attention to, is the fact how quickly the vehicle can slow down for a maneuver versus, for free, versus an actual maneuver where you have to actually put dice on the table to slow that vehicle down. We don't talk a lot about that aspect of it. There's also the fact that when you start talking about top speed, that's where you start getting your damage calculations for things like collisions and all of that. And remembering that is a key feature of it. And that's why the rules actually say you should constantly keep a little record next to the vehicle on the tabletop for how fast it's currently going, because that's very fluid. You might only slow down by 1 or 2 inches, even though your acceleration would allow you to slow down by 10, 20 inches.
So, and here's the other thing, too, I think that can be a little bit confusing. Well, I don't know about confusing, maybe inconvenient. When you start talking about acceleration and top speed, everything's measured in inches on the tabletop. So if all four of us were to get into a vehicular chase or combat, all driving mid-sized cars, just regular, grocery getter cars in Savage Worlds, top speed's 40 inches. Now, 40 inches on a tabletop, you need at least 3 feet, or actually about 3.5 feet of actual tabletop surface to play out this chase, and that's for one round. So we're not even talking about the stuff in Savage Worlds that can move fast, like 40, 60 inches a round. How do you manage that on the tabletop with moving miniatures? We put 5 ping pong tables together to run a chase?
My thought is that if you're doing it using a gridded map, that each square is, 10 inches or
the problem with
something to that effect. But I don't know if that would work.
I love the idea, and it's mathematically, it immediately makes sense. Oh, well, I can only move 4 squares because that would be the equivalent of 40 if we're doing a 10 times thing. But now you have the turn template, where you can only turn up to 45 degrees, and that's
right. So that wouldn't work.
And that's not going to work real well if suddenly we're compressing that, and it can't make that tight of a turn because now you're talking about taking something and tightening that turn up. And that actually requires dice on the table. That becomes you've now committed a maneuver that's a big deal and requires there to be a dice roll because you've shortened that distance.
I guess that's true, because at that point, what we're talking is, like Jared said, I guess I wasn't thinking, but we're talking tabletop miniatures. So we're talking non-gridded, using a tape measure and measuring out 40 inches. So yeah, I mean, the only way you could really do it is you move that 40 inches, then you take your car all the way back to the end and say, okay, I'm at this point, and then you measure for, you just kind of keep rolling back the table.
Okay, but
you see what I'm saying?
Right.
And would that work? Would that make any sense?
I know how the vehicle rules work.
I mean, this all works great if you're on a virtual tabletop where, you've got an endless table that you can keep kind of sliding to one side or the other. But, I don't know many of us that, other than like a Chessex map that we're erasing and redrawing, and 800 inches of movement for the space shuttle.
Right. And let's think about this too. I mean, let's talk realistically here, practically and pragmatically. If I'm getting together to host a tabletop game, and we've just, we've been in this casino, this huge fight's broken out, and now it's going to turn into a car chase through the streets of Las Vegas. Okay, I'm probably going to have a battle map. I'm going to go from a casino style battle map,
right,
or some kind of printed landscaped battle map that is going to give me hexes and inches for those miniatures. That shit doesn't print an airplane blueprint scale. I mean,
let's just talk about that for a second as well. Beyond even scale, again, a lot of people out there are using hexes. If you're using hexes, you're allowing people to make maneuvers with their vehicle they can't make in Savage Worlds without a dice roll.
Right. Well, let's explain the turntable. Let's explain why we have the turn template, Dave, and the actual turn.
The turn template that's in the book actually lays out the exact 45-degree angle, and you can turn up to that for free. That's just part of your normal movement. You're normally controlling the vehicle. Mm-hmm. If you turn tighter than a 45-degree angle, you actually have to put dice on the table to control the vehicle. If you're over a certain speed, I believe it's 15 inches, it's at -2. If you're over 30 inches of speed, it's at -4. Because speed kills. It's harder to control the vehicle. So these things matter when you start talking about this. And this is the trickle down of the fact these rules were lifted from tabletop wargaming, where you've got a 12-foot table and you're moving a fleet of tanks out and they're only turning 10 degrees to get into a slightly better position behind a hill, versus when you're moving a sports car in a chase through the city streets to replicate what you just saw in John Wick last week.
Right. Weren't these taken from either Great Rail Wars or the Savage Showdown rules?
I thought, and I could be completely wrong, but I thought that the Savage Showdown rules were written after they converted Great Rail Wars and the old Deadlands into what is now Deadlands Reloaded and the basis for what became Savage Worlds.
Okay.
I thought Savage Showdown was kind of and here's our, tabletop battle rules.
Right, our tabletop minis rules.
The role play aspect out of Savage Worlds.
Right. Now, vehicular combat, too, still works a lot like regular combat in that you draw cards, action cards for initiative, just like you would. Driving is a free action to maneuver or accelerate the vehicle. And then you could do tricks. You could do turns and tricks. There's bootlegger's reverse. You can slam on the handbrake and spin around. and go the opposite direction, but it's a driving roll to negative.
Is it like ramming and stuff like that?
Ram another opponent.
You've got the ramming, you've got the bootlegger's turn, but you also have things like the hard brake to slow down or the tight turn. Those are actually considered maneuvers and are considered in action. As soon as you want to make that 90-degree turn off of 5th onto Alameda, well, you're going to put dice on the table, and that becomes an action. So if you also want to lean out the window and fire, that puts both those at a -2. If you're moving at 15 inches, that puts both those at a -4. -2 for that additional speed. And if you don't happen to have steady hands, the shot is going to be an additional -2.
Hold it still, damn it! I'm trying. Well, and it's the whole thing too, where you can be up on 2 wheels. And driving on 2 wheels is a -4. I mean, but there's also this kind of no man's land for the GM to determine any other kind of maneuver. Yeah. What's the strain? What's the difficulty?
Maneuver. The text actually says, this one covers most everything else a driver, rider, or pilot might try to do, such as riding a horse down a steep or slippery hill, avoiding a manhole cover or other obstacle, or driving through an oil slick at high speed. The GM sets the modifier. If the roll is failed, the driver goes out of control as usual.
Now, the nice thing, too, is the out-of-control table becomes this basically gritty damage table for your car, right? I mean,
absolutely. And that's another aspect of this that I think gets overlooked. Let's say you're driving your car, and Jared decides to lean out the window of the chase car and just takes a pot shot at the car and rolls enough damage to do damage to the vehicle. As soon as he does, you owe the GM a roll on the out-of-control table to maintain control of your vehicle. You have to make a driving check, or else you're making that roll on the table, and you might have just taken 1 wound and then flipped the car down the road because you rolled so poorly. Or side slips, as you lost control and slam into a wall and take even more damage. The rules in vehicles are designed almost very quickly to bring an end to any vehicle option that's going on, so that you move back into what Savage Rules is a lot more comfortable with, which is that personal scale. Gets you out of the vehicle and using the car as cover.
Right.
Right.
Now, the other thing to remember, too, is that vehicles, like wild cards, can sustain 3 wounds. On a 4th wound, they're wrecked. They require days and hours of repair before they'll function anymore. So, and it's not even you suffering a wound. If you take damage equal to or above the toughness, you're making a driver roll. Now, so you could have a situation where, okay, we're on the main streets of Vegas. I do a spin around a bus. I don't quite make it. It clips the back end of the vehicle. Okay, so now that's a ram. So I got to figure out, okay, what's the speed and toughness of the bus? What's the speed and toughness of the vehicle? Okay, now everybody inside, are they wearing seat belts? Because some of that force is going to come through and shake everybody inside. There are a lot of moving parts when you start talking about running anything with the vehicle rules.
As a GM, if you allow your player characters to have a vehicle, expect them to weaponize it. And I'm not even talking strapping a gun to the car. I'm talking
just running people over.
They're going to ram something. They're going to run somebody over. They're going to decide to use it as a battering ram to take down a gate with a sumo wrestler who does a butt slam to flip it over and blow it up. Mm-hmm. This is stuff that's actually happened in games that we have here on YouTube that you can watch. Your players are going to weaponize that vehicle. Take a moment and read through collision. Read through damaging a vehicle before you let them have that.
Yeah,
know what to do when it happens.
And make yourself
What was that, Jim?
Make yourself some notes.
Yes.
And run it through a few times.
Right. I'm gonna also say too that you really need to understand how collision damage works, and soft obstacles, and even falling and jumping from a vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all going to become crucial things Because case in point, an ambulance in a zombie apocalypse going 60 miles an hour. The driver decided, fuck it, I'm gonna flip a bitch. You're gonna what? I'm gonna flip a bitch. I'm gonna just do a straight out U-turn. All right, driving rolled a -6. You go top speed. You're trying to, and didn't make it. Flip the vehicle over and over. Everybody inside, no seat belts. Kabang boom, kabang boom. So,
see, you're ejected, and you're ejected, and you're ejected.
Yeah, bad things happen when you do that.
So yeah, to say that the out of control table and damage to a vehicle mimics gritty damage is absolutely correct. I don't think Savage Worlds has a grittier version of damage for vehicles that you can apply. I've never seen a setting that went, hey, you know what's not bad enough? The damage that's done to vehicles.
Well,
I mean, crying out loud, on the out of control table, you roll 2d6, and the best you can hope for is a skid.
Yeah, where your vehicle moves a dice roll in a direction.
Well, and I think this is quite overlooked too. Is people when they start playing it do not think about what causes damage to the vehicle causes damage to the passengers.
Oh yeah, the vehicle's
get dead real quick.
Armor,
yeah.
But if the vehicle took enough damage to take a wound, there's a good chance so did the passengers.
Yeah, there's a reason why there's a big push right now on all these PSAs about backseat passengers buckling up and not becoming a projectile in a car. Because that shit happens.
Because inertia's a bitch, motherfucker.
Yeah. When you hit and that person in the back goes flying forward, yeah.
Right.
Let's just do the math real quick, okay? You are traveling at 30 miles an hour in a vehicle, and the vehicle hits a non-moving object. Guess what, Sparky? You are traveling at 30 miles an hour. Force equals mass times velocity squared. Or mass times velocity, I'm sorry. Mass times velocity. 30 miles an hour times a 200-pound human being. 6,000 pounds of impact force.
Yep.
Something's gonna give, and the car's harder than you are.
That's gonna leave a bruise. That might leave you shaking. It'll leave you shaking.
So, Carlin Kendrick asked in chat, doesn't collision damage not only hurt the car, but also rolled for everyone inside the car too?
Oh,
and
yes.
that's exactly what we're talking about. Yes, there is damage that's rolled, but this is where we get into what Jared was talking about, the difference between a hard collision and a soft collision, where your player character is wearing the safety belts, etc. You might have something like they only take half the normal damage, they were wearing their safety belt, and they apply the vehicle's toughness as additional armor for their character's toughness against that roll that you're making for the damage against them. But you can, in all reality, you can have a passenger in the car take more damage than the vehicle did because it's not roll damage once and apply to all passengers. It's you're rolling individually. If it's dice of damage, you roll 6 dice for the car, and then you roll 6 dice per passenger.
So the actual rules state safety harnesses. It says a seatbelt protects anyone wearing it. Roll half the normal damage dice, round down for those characters. Do the same for airbags, but subtract 1 additional die of damage as well.
Okay, but here's the clincher, Chris. You got to back up in that paragraph and start at the top of that paragraph, which collisions are very deadly in Savage Worlds. Okay, that's the opening sentence.
Yes, it is.
All right, there sets the tone for that. Right, the damage to the vehicle and its passengers is 1d6 for every 5 inches of its current speed.
Remember what I said? You had to note current speed every round for that vehicle. This is why.
If I'm traveling at 60 inches, how many d6 am I rolling?
12.
12.
Yep, that's gonna hurt. That's gonna hurt.
Now, if we're both rolling at 60,
yeah,
hold on.
relative speed, because that's in
Now
there.
we're talking relative speed. So now if we're both heading each other at 60 miles an hour and we collide,
That's 120, baby.
4 dice.
guess what happens? Yeah, we add those two together.
Yeah, you're now rolling 24 dice of damage against both vehicles. They both take that damage, and then all
we
the
spread it around to
passengers
the
both.
passengers.
And if one of them happens to have heavy armor, whatever the heavy armor value of the vehicle is, acts as AP against the toughness of the other vehicle.
Ouch.
Because, your Subaru, the Subaru's screwed.
So I guess the real lesson for all players.
It's less screwed than a Volkswagen Beetle.
I don't know. The Beetle might go under.
Because, it's a Subaru. They're supposed to be good at that. But anyway, if you're rolling 12 six-sided dice, statistically speaking, at least 2 of them are going to explode.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to say is this. Here's a good word of advice. If you ever are playing next to somebody who goes, cheese it, it's the cops, jump in this sports car, and we're going to zoom the hell away from here. Don't get in that car unless you have a shit ton of bennies.
Let them jump in the car and drive off. You're
As a
next
passenger.
Melt into the crowd.
And after it takes that first wound, find a way to dive out while he's getting speed back up again.
To be fair, I do
away at high speed in this vehicle.
You're better off in the car than you are on foot if the cops decide to just run you down in the middle of the chase.
That's fun.
Fine, you guys drive off at high speed in the car. I'm going to make a stealth roll to melt into the crowd. Laters.
Yeah, you don't want to be a soft obstacle.
Yeah,
being run over in a game. So
if Jim decides to melt into the crowd and the cops see him, what's going to happen? The cop is going to rule, well, I'm wrapped in metal and he's not, and I'm going to ram him. Jim takes full damage. He takes a D6 for every 5 inches the cop car was going. The cop car does not take full damage because he is a soft target and does half the normal damage in return. So let's say they're rolling 3d6. The cop car only takes 1d6.
now here's the fun thing. So I'm in a vehicle. It's traveling 60 inches. I decide, you know what? I'm out. And I open the car door and I just jump the hell out. So let's talk about what happens when you do that. So number one, you need to make an agility roll. Right? If you do well on the agility roll, yay, you only suffer half the usual damage of a collision.
As if the car had just hit a stationary object because, well, you still had all that momentum and you just hit the ground.
Right. So you're still traveling at 60 miles an hour and decide to come to a sudden stop by stepping out of the vehicle onto something that's not moving at all. Whoa.
Road pizza.
That agility roll is to let you roll instead of breaking your bones when you put your feet on the ground. Now, what happens if you don't make that agility roll? Oh, shit. That looks like 12d6. Time to roll 12d6.
Right, instead of 6.
Right.
So that's so much better.
I'm going to be really nice, GM. Go ahead and you can roll your own 12d6. Because this is you hitting the ground. So it's you trying to do damage to the ground.
Right. So you get to roll the damage. I mean, that's only fair. That's gentlemanly rules right there.
But going back to the Jim melting into the crowd thing using a stealth roll, I do want to point one thing out. The cops are traveling at high speed. Therefore, do they take a minus to their notice roll to see me?
Not if they've been chasing you.
No, they take a minus to controlling the vehicle to turn after you, but not to notice you.
Especially since they're actively looking for you.
Control roll is at -2, not everything.
I think the notice roll should be: you try to spot something on the side at a car moving at high speed.
Well, the driver is looking ahead. The passenger's looking around. So,
And here again, we can look at other rules that exist as things like the steady hands edge that you can take. Unstable platform could very easily be applied in that situation to go, yeah, you're not the one in control of the vehicle, so does the passenger cop spot Jim as he melts into the crowd? Give me a notice roll, -2 for unsteady platform. Now, that's not technically the way the rule is written, but you could certainly apply it in this situation to take advantage of the fact that it's a high-speed chase and his focus is elsewhere.
Yeah. See, as a GM, being the dick GM I have other questions for Jim's character. Are you still wearing the mask that you burst out of the bank in?
Oh no!
Are you still dressed in all black?
The stealth roll. That's part of making the stealth roll.
Right. So you're still dressed in all black?
Oh, I'm ditching the hoodie.
Are you holding a weapon and a bag of cash?
I left those in the car.
Because if the answer to any of those is yes, then I'm gonna add a bonus to the notice roll because you're standing the fuck out in that crowd you're trying to merge into. Like, oh, look, there's the only asshole wearing a Hawaiian shirt in the middle of everybody dressed in polos.
Is he wearing a dead president mask?
Right.
I'm not a criminal.
Big white bag with a dollar sign on it.
Right.
So, couple of things from chat. Alec Muzzy points out, why is everyone trying to apply real-world physics to a cinematic game? An archaeologist can't survive being dragged behind a Nazi truck, but they can in the movies and should in Savage Worlds too. Here, I have to say, I don't disagree with Alec at all, and this is my biggest problem with the vehicle rules in Savage Worlds is because they were lifted from tabletop wargaming, they were lifted from a game that's trying to replicate more physics and reality than what we're used to in the rest of Savage Worlds. And that's why they don't necessarily always feel congruent. This is also why a lot of people, when it comes to that moment, are going to run it as a chase or a dramatic task instead of actually running a vehicular combat because, quite frankly, it does feel a little too gritty, a little too realistic.
I can tell you, in all the time I've been playing, I have never done this. I have never used the vehicular combat rules.
As I will say, as a GM, you haven't. I know you have as a player because we did it here on the channel.
Yep. Right. Yes. As a GM, I've never used them. Correct.
And I will say, as a GM, having run them, they're very difficult to keep track of. I mean, just the fact that you have to look things, I would find myself constantly looking things up. Like, wait a minute, hold on a second. How fast were you moving? Divided by 5, 1d6. Okay. Carry the 2. Was there a negative? Yeah, there's a negative. All right, wait. Oh, wait, you're saying you're turning at what rate of speed? There's a lot of this. Wait, check. And it can pull you out of the moment. And I think that's why, that's why most of us prefer the chase rules. Because they're a little bit more cinematic, a little bit more abstracted. I would say this, though. If I were going to run a gritty modern-day warfare or a gritty modern-day cop procedural, I would use the vehicular combat rules almost exclusively.
I can see going either way. I will say that I totally agree with Alec here. And like David was saying, I would go with the chase rules and I have many times, because these rules are slower to implement. And for that reason alone, I would pick the chase rules just because I can flow. We can just flow with the game and keep things moving. Now, but like as Jared was saying, if I want a grittier kind of feel to it, then yeah, I see no problem with using rules, but they are going to be slower to do.
Well, at least until everybody gets used to them. I would say this, like, okay, after doing a couple of games where we had to do collision damage, as a GM, I would just go to Dave. What's the collision damage on this? He's going 60 inches, and he's making basically a full reverse.
But I'm just going to throw this out there. Not everybody has a Dave at the table they can.
I understand.
And I'm not trying to like sell myself as being better than I am. It's just you've gotten used to being able to pitch a rules question to me. Uh-huh. Not everybody has that rules lawyer, but not the argumentative guy at the table. Right. Who just knows the rules by rote, like a freaking encyclopedia.
Right. I would say if there's no reason to get a gritty level and feel and some kind of realism in the middle of all this abstract, it depends. I may want to run a Bruce Willis Die Hard adventure, in which case, vehicle rules, no, throw them out. They're not congruent with the universe.
You mean you can't launch a car at a helicopter and under the vehicle rules?
Right, and dive out, just shoulder roll into traffic under a tunnel, and have everybody just break inches from hitting you. Yeah, right. But so these rules were not congruent. They're not going to fit or knit and be in context with that kind of game. So absolutely don't use them.
Well,
but
Mel Primus talks about how he sometimes uses them for his Savage Rifts game, because of that they do fit very well. He's got a guy with a hover cycle, and that's a setting and a world where this big, gritty, bombastic amounts of damage are second nature to everything else. So you could absolutely see running that there, because the characters can soak it. They've got the power and the armor and all that to go with it. Right. So for me, I was challenged not long back, and some people who follow me are aware of this. I did a conversion for BattleTech. I'm not a fan or anything, but in BattleTech, it's big armored robots fighting it out, and there's a nice section in the Savage Sci-Fi Companion that talks about the walkers. And when I started looking through that, and I was getting a lot of questions from people, how are you going to handle heat? How are you going to handle knockdown and things like that? So much of that is handled by Savage Worlds already that the Savage Worlds version, when I put it on the tabletop with my players, one of the players who's a long-term BattleTech fan said you've got to reduce the dice in damage that things are causing because the fights are over too quick. Because those games are these big, long, grindy war games where things are taking, hundreds of points of damage before they're destroyed. And in Savage Worlds, they were dying to a single shot because all it takes is a good hit. And then, oh, by the way, you fell over, bounced off of a rock, hit a tree, and as your cockpit fills with water, you had to cut the straps and swim out or drown.
Right. Well, and okay, so let's kind of talk about this. Is there a happy medium to be found in merging the vehicular combat rules with the chase rules? I'm not sure that you can do that easily or adequately. I don't think you can merge them necessarily.
No, they're too. I think they're too different.
Yeah.
To really mesh those together.
Exceptionally abstract. Almost to a fault. And we've talked about how, Scott's very fond of saying that the chase rules in Savage Worlds are hot garbage, or a dumpster fire are his two favorite things to call it. But it's because you have to wrap your head around abstraction to a level that nothing else in Savage Worlds does. Unfortunately, vehicular combat is the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, where you have to wrap your head around the most gritty thing and the most, grounded in reality of anything that Savage Worlds does. So they absolutely are these kind of polar opposites pushing against each other.
Yeah, diametrically opposed.
So, I mean, okay, so let's say we're going to talk about vehicles as they apply to chase rules. Let's talk about that as it being a vehicle chase. I'm going to recommend one thing highly above all else. If you're looking for a cinematic, high-octane chase, then by all means, use the 5-round or less. This chase is going to last 5 rounds. Put a clock on it. Mm-hmm. Do not do the dogfight rules with vehicles.
Not for regular chase, anyway.
No. It will take too long.
It will just if you're going to do the dogfight rules, make sure people are armed with weapons capable of doing damage to the vehicles. If you've got people throwing bottles of water, hucking golf balls, it's just not going to cut it when you've got a vehicle that is going to have an 18 toughness. You have to have weapons capable of dealing with it.
Right. And I would add this to GMs and players. You really, really need to think outside the box when it comes to force. and maneuvers being tricks and trappings that go along with them. Having a guy on a motorcycle go, okay, I'm traveling high speed on the motorcycle. The guy's right behind me. Okay, I'm going to put it on its front wheel, turn around. As it pivots, I'm pulling out a gun and going, and then landing and coming right at him and going the opposite direction.
Okay, for starters, I counted 3 actions there.
Why? It's all one trick. It's all
standing the
one
mic up on its nose, pivoting it around,
one trick.
Shot.
It's all one maneuver.
So in a chase,
but
hold on. My intention's not to do damage. It's meant to nothing other than a trick. It's a smarts trick. Why is that not considered one glorious maneuver?
I would not want to consider that as one maneuver because you're gaining more advantage than just performing a trick.
I'm not making a fighting. I'm not making a shooting roll.
You're changing direction.
Right.
Okay, but we're not measuring movement or monitoring direction in an abstract chase.
Right.
The other guy doesn't have to make a roll to counter and follow Jared's smuggler's turn that he just did by doing a stoppie on the motorcycle. It just narratively the guy whips around and keeps following. The interesting aspect is everything Jared just described falls under a maneuver within the chase rules called the force.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's all it is. All Jared's done is he's declared a force and then narrated this really complex thing. Just like when you declare that I'm doing an agility trick and then you narrate, I run up the wall, backflip over the orc and cut him across the eyebrow so that blood runs into his eyes. You're not actually doing damage. You're not doing all these agility maneuvers to get up the wall and then over his head. You're making one roll and narrating a very cinematic thing. This is why, for a more cinematic gameplay, the chase rules work better for vehicles than the actual vehicle rules do. Because like Jib said, that becomes 3 actions in vehicular combat.
Right. In vehicular combat, I absolutely agree. That's 3 actions. In a chase, it's 1 force maneuver. And that's what I'm saying is, that's why I brought this up specifically. Because everything in a chase is 100% abstracted. Your distance from each other, based on a card you draw, everything else is abstracted. It's completely not reality.
Yeah, I mean, because one round you can be in melee range, and the next round you can be in long range.
Yeah,
right.
All based off the card. And so you have to wrap your head around, well, maybe that one round is not taking 6 seconds.
Yeah, they're not. It's moments of time. It's not a round.
Right.
And it's also, one of the greatest examples of a chase that I've ever seen was done by Clint in an explanation where it's this big, long riverboat chase, and he talks about everything that's happening. And as a GM, conceptually, you have to know that layout so that when those cards come up, you can describe each thing happening. But the interesting aspect about that is that one boat might draw a club and get a complication where there's an obstacle in the way that the other boat or other, participant in the chase didn't have to deal with. You have to be able to explain that within your narrative. So maybe their complication is when Jared did his little stoppy thing and went back the other way. Now they drew a complication. They went to do a smuggler's turn and bump a stack of boxes. So there's a dumpster in the way or whatever the case may be.
Right.
And now they have to give that additional roll.
Right. And if I'm running it by the rules, right? So a shaking character. So here's what it says. On a success, the target suffers a -2 to his next maneuvering trait roll. On a raise, the target is affected as if they hit an obstacle. That sounds a lot like a test of wills to me, applied to an abstract chase. They're making a maneuvering roll to, oh shit, and oh crap, Trinity just pulled a wicked bitch on the freeway in the Matrix, and we're the agents chasing her. Oh crap! Make a driving roll to -2 there, Smith Johnson.
I think the part for me that really kind of cinches it is take a look at why you're running a chase to begin with. what is the actual goal of this? Are you trying to simulate how much damage a rocket's going to do to the enemy car? Then run that as a vehicular combat. Are you trying to figure out, can the guy on the motorcycle evade the guy in the sports car? Then run a chase. If it's a guy on a pedal bike being chased by a guy on a motorcycle, maybe a dramatic task or even just a simple, you get stopped narratively by the guy who you can't outrun, and then pick up the scene thereafter. You have to look at the different situation and know which tool to reach into the toolbox and pull out and use, because vehicular combat is not going to work great for the guy on the bike, but neither is a chase. Both of these things end up very badly for the guy who moves at 1/3 the speed of his opponent.
Yeah, so in that situation, that becomes a dramatic task for the guy on the bike to evade you. It has nothing to do with the NPCs, right?
Yeah. So Carlin asked a question before we went on the chase rules thing. He said, would you add collision damage to a vehicle on top of, say, a rocket from a rocket launcher hitting a car? No. It's a weapon designed to be fired at a vehicle. It absolutely just does its raw damage to the vehicle, and you're done. But yeah, obviously, things like most of the rockets are designed with large amounts of AP, so they're just going to rip through most vehicles. The toughness that most vehicles have is predominantly armor.
Now, once the vehicle goes out of control and crashes into something, then we're going to do crashing damage. Again.
There's going to be some collision damage on the aftermath if there's anything left to crash.
Right, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to throw this out here as a very wild idea for conversation. So take this with a grain of salt and the spirit in which it's intended. Going out on a limb, how do we feel? How do we feel as GMs about every once in a while? Let's say we're running the Fast and Furious as a Savage Worlds game.
Okay.
There's only so much. I don't want it to be 2 hours of running chase rules. Right? So
at some point you need something other than chase rules.
Right?
Yeah.
So in a situation like that, or even just as a palate cleanser, what do you guys think about using mass combat or the quick combat rules as applied to a vehicle chase or combat? Hear me out. I'm the Fast and Furious crew. I've got 8 guys who are total badasses behind wheels, going up and down the Ventura Freeway. We're being chased by helicopters, the FBI, police, local law enforcement. There's traffic. Kind of sounds a little bit like a quick combat rule for me, because I'm trying to get to the Mexican border. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to cross the Mexican border.
So where my problem comes in with the mass battles aspect of it is, and I see this a lot, is a GM will try to run a mass battle where the mass battle is the party with an NPC against 30 guys. So the opposing side gets 30 tokens. How many does the party get? Well, they have their own wounds, but let's say they get a token for each of them. Either the first of the end of round comes up, and they lose 3 tokens. They just lost 50% of their force because there were all kinds of modifiers of being outnumbered by the enemy, etc. Mass battles really only works when there truly is an army on both sides. A great example, if we're going to go back to Fast and the Furious, is I think it was the second movie. There's a scene where they drive into a warehouse, and then out of this warehouse come like 110 cars going in different directions, and the cops have to split up. That's a moment where you might run mass battles because you've got enough tokens on either side to figure out who gets away and who doesn't. That said, the quick combat, to me, I'm not a fan of those rules, but I think it probably works better here than trying to run an actual vehicular combat for vehicles where, again, if we're looking at the Fast and the Furious franchise, there's not many people with weapons, and even the ones who are leaning out there with maybe a handgun. It's 2d6 versus 18, 19 points of toughness. They're just not going to achieve anything.
Fair enough. I'm just
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember the quick combat rules. I haven't looked at those.
Essentially, the quick combat rules are an abrogated mass combat done in one round.
Okay. Where were those? Where were those out of?
It was something that Shane released right through the website. Each of the player characters makes one dice roll, and that one dice roll results in whether or not you took any wounds in the entirety of the combat. Great example he gave was it's like an overturned wagon is being attacked repeatedly by dogs. So you run a couple of rounds of these quick combats while the players are doing things like trying to repair the wagon. And this covers 6 hours of repeated attacks, but you can get it done in 2 dice rolls and then bam, move your game right on, rather than having to find some way to focus that 6 hours of time in your game out into multiple rounds.
Right. I look at it as like
for me, that raises 2 questions for me. One, why do I want to abbreviate this combat, this mass battle so much?
I would say this because it is the action. It's the version. I would say if I'm trying to kind of replicate a Savage Worlds experience at the table of the high octane action montage before the big battle or the big next
montage.
Scene, that's what I'm doing. If I'm running Transformers and all this crap flying from the sky and machines turning into robots, wrecking the city, and everybody's running and that's not really what the climactic scene is about. It's just
I knew that's what you were gonna say.
It's just
so my answer is
a big battle between Optimus. Why?
Right. I knew that's what you were gonna say, and my answer then becomes the combat itself is not meaningful to the game. So why did you do it at all?
Jim, careful. When I said those exact words, I got the most hate I've ever received from the Savage community because I would dare say that Shane proposed a rule that doesn't make sense with a non-attrition based system like Savage Worlds. The fact I would dare say, why run a combat if it's not important, got me more hate than anything I've ever done in the community.
All right, I can take hate. I can take hate.
It's not that it's not important.
If it's not important to the game, why do we do it at all? Let's just move on to the thing it is.
How did I say it wasn't important? I said it was a montage to the big battle. It's a transition.
Yes, but as soon as you say
scene
to the big battle, you're saying that whatever happens in the middle is not going to result in a character death or a loss of a vehicle. It's not going to have an effect. This is the montage that doesn't matter that fills the space before we get to that big battle scene that does matter, is what Jim's saying.
Oh, okay. Because it gives you the opportunity to earn a Benny.
I mean, it does give you an opportunity to earn a Benny, but, in conversations I've had recently with Eric Lamoureux, he ran this a bit when they were doing one of their games, and it also gave the players a lot of extra wounds they were carrying as well. And that's direct from Shane, right in the write-up about it. That's what the quick combat rules are designed to do. It's designed to soften the party up before you move on. And there again, that's where I have my problem with it is, to me, that just smacks of attrition. That's not the way I run my game. It's not the way, to me, Savage Worlds is designed, so I don't really find it useful.
The question to me is the battle meaningful? If the battle is meaningful, the battle has impact on what happens later in the game, then it deserves more attention than one die roll on either side.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, then why'd we do it? That's all I'm saying. Because I know if I'm a player, I would be very twitchy about putting our entire fate on one die roll.
Wait. So I can take multiple wounds on this one dice roll?
Yeah.
That can be a little scary.
And to be fair, that's exactly what Mass Battles does too. If your player characters have their character dive in to do something, they absolutely are risking multiple wounds on a single dice roll.
Yes, they are. Now, okay.
But at least it makes sense because then it's the clash of two armies. So
having diatribed against this thing, if it works for what you're doing, rock with it.
Yeah.
For long. But
I'm just throwing it out there as an option and for discussion. I'm not married to it one way or the other. I'm just having.
No, I know you're using it. You run from now on. I know you.
The worst part of this is I don't necessarily think it's a bad fit for what you're trying to say to use it for. It makes sense for some of this if you want just a different mechanic to run for a minute in a game where all you've been running are dramatic tasks and chases all night long. Here we're going to put some dice on the table and some wounds are going to happen. That definitely makes sense, and I think it fits better than the vehicle rules for that game. It wouldn't if somebody had an SMG or a rocket launcher or it was a pair of tanks. You know, at that point, vehicular combat becomes a lot more important.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to bounce back to chase rules for just 1 second here. Here's the thing. Yes, the passengers can make cooperative rolls in the chase rules. Here's one of the other things that the chase rules I'm not a big fan of, and we've discussed this in another podcast. So by all means, go take a listen. Pretty much the passengers become just that, passengers. They become spectators in the middle of that adventure if you're in a vehicle. I would say this. No, I cannot go look out over there as a cooperative notice roll because it has nothing to do with what you're fucking doing, which is driving or piloting. I'm sorry, but I'm going on a Dick GM rant here for just a second about cooperative roles in Savage Worlds because I hear it come up all the fucking time. In order for a cooperative role to be cooperative, you must be making the same skill or trait test. Otherwise, it is not cooperative.
Last I knew, most vehicles only have one driver's wheel.
Now, this is some crazy teen comedy where the chase is taking place in a driver's instructor vehicle, and the instructor on the passenger side has a brake, and again, by all means, go sick. Go ahead, give me a cooperative driving roll on that handbrake to stop immediately.
I did have
But if you read the example in the book, it expressly says that Big Ben decides to navigate, pointing out debris in the road ahead, and makes a cooperative driving roll.
Right, driving roll.
Yeah, it's not a notice roll.
So you're saying, So you're saying you're okay with them navigating by making a driving roll, but not a notice roll.
Right. I'm just saying in order for them to add a cooperative bonus, they need to follow the cooperative rules.
And the logic behind that makes perfect sense.
Right. I hear way too many GMs in New to Savage Worlds, and I hear it in all kinds of actual plays and everything too. I was guilty of it for the first few sessions myself. So I went, wait a minute. How the hell are you making a +1 to his driving roll by noticing and going, oh, look out? The two things aren't the same.
Right. So, I see what you're saying.
In order for it to be cooperative, it has to be the same skill test.
Now, I had a conversation recently where somebody was asking this question about a space piracy game. And they were trying to lift some stuff out of 50 Fathoms and Pirates of the Spanish Main, and they are desperately waiting for Chris to release Through Hell and High Water so that they can steal from that as well. And they were asking, how do you handle the other passengers of the ship? And the thing I told them to do with that, because you're dealing with something larger than a passenger vehicle, and anytime you're dealing with this where you're on a starship, you're on an old Age of Sail ship, whatever, those other characters are facing other challenges. Like, the guy behind the wheel just laid the ship on its side because they really needed to, make that turn around the reef, or they were going to, rip up their keel. And everyone on board now is facing an agility roll not to lose their footing and go overboard because the ship just canted 50, 60 degrees off. So every other round, you should be interspersing something for the passengers. In a small passenger car, it's a lot harder because, well, what are they going to do if I'm sitting in the back seat, seat belted in? And this is where I think vehicular combat rules shine, because that is going to be over fast. I ran vehicular combat in which Jared and a few of the other regulars in my game were involved. One combat rule, and the enemy vessel was destroyed. Because as soon as you make those rolls, it can go bad in a real quick way.
Right. And the thing you have to remember too, when you're talking about the chase rules, you're picking one skill that has to do with the mode of the chase. And if you're a vehicle, there's only one wheel. There's only one driver. And that's the maneuver roll everybody's making. It does not give your passengers a lot of opportunity, according to rules as written, to fire a weapon. Do things of that nature.
I think there again, that's the don't reach for these rules if they aren't the best fit for what you're trying to achieve. Yeah, chase rules might be better because it's more abstract for your diehard game, but it might also just be quicker to run it as a vehicular combat. And, oh, look, they moved 40 inches. We're completely off this city block anyway.
Right.
And move on to the next scene.
All right, so we got any more questions or comments from the peanut gallery? On this one, and while Dave's looking, I'm going to pose this question to Jib, because I've heard Telltale of a Mad Max in Savage World. Did you run that as vehicular combat?
Probably not, because at the beginning of the scene, the vehicle is actually mired in up to its axles in mud.
Makes sense.
And really what has to happen is they have to either get it loose, in which case they get to do the succeeding combat on their terms, or they don't, in which case they do the succeeding combat on the bad guy's terms. If we were going to go back and if we were going to do an earlier scene, like the desert scene or the tornado scene, then yes, I'd absolutely use vehicle combat.
Well, interestingly enough, I do just want to point out, a good portion of the combat that happens in most of the Mad Max films, not just the new one, but most of them, are not vehicular combat scenes. They're combat scenes that happen to be occurring in or around a vehicle. It's him reaching out the window and climbing up to the roof and walking along it while he's shooting people, or dangling off of something while he's in personal combat. There's also just the fact, sit down and look at the actual formula. Mad Max starts out, he loses his car, spends the rest of the movie trying to get the car back. From Mad Max 2 on, that's the formula for that string of movies. So
it's about a guy trying to get to work and not being able to find his car or a gas station. That's what all those movies are about.
So it's a version of Falling Down?
Yep. It's post-apocalyptic Falling Down.
Which was such a great movie.
I love
Falling Down was so good.
Love that movie. Okay, so like as a real quick example, how would we do the chase scene from the first Indiana Jones when
you answered it yourself? It's chase.
Hold on. Where they've got the Ark and Indy's on horseback. How do we run? We run that as a chase.
He's chase.
Okay, so
What's wrong, Dave?
when he starts beating the shit out of all the guys, no longer a chase, and now we're in just hand-to-hand combat. The chase starts again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Break it up, a chase, couple chase rounds,
He does
couple hand-to-hand rounds, couple chase rounds.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave. I can see it's killing you. It's killing you.
I'm just going to say this. Make sure you're using the modern chase rules if you're going to try to replicate that scene where one person is on a horse and the other is in a vehicle. If you're using the old chase rules, which are arguably a valid option and probably better for many chases, those old rules are not going to be friendly to the guy who's got a horse that's moving 6 inches.
Right, because my last time I checked, let's see, what's the land speed of a horse in Savage Worlds?
I think it's
More than a African swallow,
Well, what if an African or European swallow?
whichever. I don't remember. It's late.
Laden or unladen? Seriously though, hold on a second. I'm trying to find horse on the vehicle table.
It's because it's not there. You have to go all the way down to the beast.
Horse and carriage. Horse and carriage, civilian vehicle. So horse and carriage, animal's pace. Acceleration to top speed.
This is why I said it's not on that chart.
God damn it.
I warned you.
I must find bestiary. I must find bestiary. Here we go. So a horse's top speed, 10. So in that equation, when I'm running that chase, it's Indy going, ha, ha, and just watching the trucks going.
Yeah, I mean, bye, truck.
Trucks moving 36 conservatively. Indy's just watching him disappear into the distance.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's
the modern chase rules, and you can maybe pull this off. But
the chase rules, though, all he's got to do is do better on a riding roll than they do on a driving roll.
Mm-hmm.
And because they have a higher speed, they get a +2. Just saying. Okay, so when it breaks out and he actually catches the guy that's got the van with the arc in it, then it becomes a perilous combat surrounding a motor vehicle.
Right.
Yeah.
I shoot you. I hit you in the arm. Okay, I come around the side and I kick you out of the car. Oh no, you grabbed on the back and you climbed back in and you punched me in my arm. That's just one big fight scene.
This is a fight happening over a hazard. That's a falling hazard. Everyone's making constantly
everything is
not to fall the fuck out.
Yeah, you have to make an agility roll just to be able to take an action in that round.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff you can do with that. One thing I will say is this. If everyone in a combat is affected equally by unstable platform, throw out the penalty. You simply don't need it unless you want to spend several rounds as a comedy of errors, as no one hits anything, taking that additional -2 to everything they're doing.
Right.
If everyone's affected by it, it's automatic. Jib has said this before in regards to edges and things like that. If everyone has to have it, it should just be free. If everyone's suffering the same penalty, just throw it out.
If everyone has to make an agility roll to act in the round, that's different from everybody taking a -2.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Right. Well, and also too, if one of your passengers has steady hands, then yeah, the -2 applies to everybody else because that guy thought ahead and bought up to the penalty.
That actually happened in my Pirates game, and wow, you had one player who stands out, and everyone else is a comedy of errors in the first couple of combats and stuff.
Right. Wait, so we're gonna be at sea, constantly going like this, and nobody's gonna take steady hands. No one. As an edge. All right. Awesome. Oh, no one took swimming as a skill. Fantastic. Oh, no one took boating on a boat or climbing, and you're in charge of keeping the sails. Out fucking standing. Congratulations. But I see you have a very high parry and dodge and a whole lot of other combat skills. Way to go.
Excellent.
You nailed it.
Too bad we're not going to be doing
it.
You can bullseye the enemy with a mortar shell. Unfortunately, you can't stand up long enough to launch the mortar.
Right. Actually, as you're going to reach for your weapon to fire it, you're going to fall, trip overboard, and glug, glug, glug down to the bottom of the ocean. But hey.
Your character happens to be wrapped in, plate armor, which is amazing penalty for that swimming room.
Woot! Woot! You killed it. You won Savage Worlds. All right. So on that note, until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Chris, the Savage Molly Fox, Dave, the Rules Baby Scott, and Jib saying keep rolling and stay savage.